I want to talk, as you can see, about the way that Germany wrestles with its histories, and particularly how it's done that in the building in the Humboldt Forum, the reconstructed city palace of the kings of Prussia and the emperors of Germany. Reconstructed this Roman Baroque building, the greatest Baroque palace in the Italian style north of the Alps, first erected around 1710 and re-erected in the first decades of this century. My first engagement with histories in Berlin was considerably earlier. I was invited, one of the great honors, to be one of the founding directors of the Humboldt Forum, to get the project launched. But before that, I've been invited to a conversation about how the museum island might be reshaped after reunification in the 1990s. It was, to me, a completely extraordinary experience and very illuminating. Every plan that was put forward for how the museum island, that complex of museums and the spaces around it, could be rearranged was attacked by somebody because it was a plan that had once been put forward either by a monarchist or a communist, by a Soviet person or by a Nazi. And when I said, surely we should be looking at the quality of the plans and not thinking about whether they had once been approved by somebody else, with a pitying look, somebody turned to me and said, Sie kommen aus einem Land, das keine Geschichte hat. The idea that I came from a country with no history came as rather a shock. But, of course, it's true. And what I want to talk about this evening is precisely how I discovered again and again in the process of working on the Humboldt Forum that we do indeed come, if we come from this country, from a land that has relatively little in the way of history compared with Germany. As you all know, at the center of German politics are two astonishing words that every foreigner has to learn very quickly. Erinnerungskultur and Vergangenheitsbewältigung. Erinnerungskultur, the political commitment to a culture of remembering. I think it's important that it is about remembering. Britain has, in many ways, a culture of commemoration, which is something completely different. The idea of Erinnerung, making it something internal to you, remembering the past because it's about you now, is a very specifically German ambition and a noble one, and one that neither Britain nor France has come close to thinking about. And the second word, Vergangenheitsbewältigung, normally translated as coming to terms with the past. But I think that's not quite right. Bewältigung implies struggle. It implies overcoming the past with an effort, with a struggle. And it is that, I think, that is so remarkable, as we've all known and seen and admired, in the way Germany in general considers and behaves to its past. Any visitor to Berlin is conscious everywhere that the past and the shame of the past is present. The Stolpersteine, the stumbling stones with the names of people, mostly Jewish, deported under the Nazis and murdered all over the city. And at the very heart of the city, unique surely in any world capital, a monument to the enduring guilt and shame of the German people, the Holocaust Memorial. This is, in a real sense, Erinnerungskultur. It's a very profound example of Vergangenheitsbewältigung. They're quite, if you'll allow me to say it, straightforward engagements with a past universally recognized as criminal and shameful. What is fascinating is when that past becomes more complicated, as in a building like the Reichstag. The Reichstag, built in the 1890s, the first parliament of united Germany after the unification of 1870. A building that housed the German parliament, the imperial parliament, not a parliament that was much liked by the Kaiser, that played a very significant role in the Weimar Republic and was, of course, totally neglected by the Nazis after the fire. But a building that became, in the Second World War, a remarkable symbol. And this is one of the things I want to address, because these buildings in Berlin take on different meanings, not just as time passes, but as different people decide they should mean different things. Whereas debates about buildings in Britain or in France are overwhelmingly aesthetic, in Berlin it's always about the meaning of the building. What is the Reichstag? What does it mean? Astonishingly, Stalin decided that it was to be the symbol of the Germany that he had defeated. Very striking and surprising, given the contempt in which Hitler had always held the Reichstag. But the conquest of the Reichstag on the 2nd of May 1945 was one of the great symbolic moments of the end of the war and the Russian victory. And strikingly, when it was restored after reunification, as you know, Norman Foster was invited to make a new dome on the top of it, an architect from an enemy country to complete the building. And equally striking, it had become by now the parliament of the new united Germany, so once again the parliament of the whole of Germany. The decision was taken that inside should be left the graffiti of the victorious Russian Soviet soldiers. Again, a memory of the degradation, the humiliation that had to be endured because of the behavior of the Nazis and the actions of Germany during the 30s and during the Second World War especially. This is, I think, a very powerful symbol, a very powerful moment. One can hardly imagine this in any other country. But it is also now a controversial one. Last week, President Steinmeier said, "Wir sind alle Kinder des 8. Mai." We're all children of the 8th of May, the end of the war, the liberation. But we are now, I think, very clearly children of different 8ths of May. It means different things. And the decision by the Berlin Land Parliament to make the 8th of May a public holiday this year was clearly a statement that they saw the 8th of May as principally the defeat of fascism. It was, if you like, a statement of the 8th of May against the AfD, because the AfD have changed the meaning of the Reichstag, they've changed the meaning of the 8th of May, and they're changing the meaning of a great many other things. It's typical of the way in which, in the German context, meanings keep evolving and moving. And very strikingly, those different meanings, the debates about German history, about what it means to be Germany, what is Germany, have crystallized in the site of this building. I say the site rather consciously, because the building, the original building, was destroyed. On it was put up the parliament of the German Democratic Republic of East Germany, and then that was destroyed, and this has been erected. What this all means, these changes on this site, are central to the debate of what it means to be German now. And I think there is no other building that carries so much in the way of symbolic weight and the potential for so much symbolic dispute. It is in this building that you can argue that Germany for the last 20 years, 30 years, has been rethinking what it is after reunification in a Europe that is now very different from the Europe of even 5 years ago. Because what stands here, the 1710 Baroque palace, eliminated the parliament of the German Democratic Republic, but it also eliminated a place where hundreds of thousands, millions of people in East Germany had gone to concerts, pop concerts, parties. It eliminated a building that stood for a certain Germany, the Germany of the German Democratic Republic, the Germany that was a full part, a building that played a full part in the memory of many of its citizens, And as we're talking about memory, the Reichstag memories are mostly public. It's about what happened in the First World War, what happened in Weimar under the Nazis in 1945. The memories that surround this site are, of course, political, but they're also personal in the most striking way. And perhaps most important is a memory I want to lodge with you at the beginning of this, as the personal memories that are at stake in this rethinking of a building is this. This is Unser Sandmännchen. This is the children's television program, equivalent of Andy Pandy, Bill and Ben, through the 1960s and the 1970s in both East and West Germany. Unser Sandmännchen, the little figure here in the middle, is having his 25th birthday party in 1984 in the Palast der Republik, in the building that was the Parliament of East Germany. This is for children. And here we see in this wonderful replica all the details of the lamp, and the lamps are accurate. Here is the symbol of the German Democratic Republic, the hammer for the proletariat of hand, the compass for the proletariat of brain, and the sheaf of the circle of wheat for the farmers. Here, every child of the German Democratic Republic knew that this building was part of their story. And every child in both East and West knew the Sandmännchen. It was das Sandmännchen in the West, unser Sandmännchen in the East. And that raises the question, today in Germany, unser, wir, who is wir? That's what the Humboldt Forum raises in a very profound way. Quickly to recap the story of the history of the original building. And this is where irritating, I have to say, this is not quite the map I wanted to have. But we want to look really at Germany, the Holy Roman Empire. This is the boundaries of the Holy Roman Empire at the end of the 17th century. This is a bit later, but the essentials will do. And this strange patchwork quilt of individual states is in the process of transformation. The Austrian Habsburg lands at the bottom are consolidating into what will become the Austro-Hungarian Empire, but the different electors are actually looking to different roles. The Elector of Hanover, certainly we want to go back, sorry. The Elector of Hanover is about to become, of course, King of England. He knows that. Parliament has decided that he will be. The Elector of Saxony is about to become King of Poland. The Elector of Brandenburg is eager that he too should become a king. And he decides that he will become king in what are already territorial lands of the family in Prussia. He will make himself king in Prussia. And here he is. This is the Elector Frederick III of Brandenburg, who is going to become Frederick I, king in Prussia, not of, in. And the statue shows you the muddle all this is about. It's partly Roman, it's partly Roman dress, it's partly Germanic, and he's wearing this ridiculous 17th century wig. It exactly sums up the building he now wants, because he, as a king, needs a proper palace. There has been a palace of the Elector on this site for centuries, and the whole of Berlin has grown round it. But now he's got to have a palace that will be the equal of the other kings of Europe. And so he brings back from Rome the architect Schlüter, and Schlüter builds him this enormous Baroque palace based on Roman models, with an entrance gate recalling the Arch of Septimius Severus and the conquests of Rome over the east, and he at last has a palace that will stand comparison with any of his European fellow monarchs. I just want to point out, so we want to go here, the old palace, as you can see here, was a wonderful jumble and muddle of different medieval and early Renaissance roofs. And he decided it was simply too difficult to do anything about that. So that was left, and Schlüter did these three great facades three great ranges of Roman Baroque architecture. The dome was added later in the 19th century. It's this building that becomes the absolute center of Berlin. Here in an engraving you can see the Unter den Linden running straight up to the Brandenburger Tor, which is the entrance to the city. You come in, and right at the end of this triumphal arch is the palace. But it's more than just that, because around this building are the emblems of the Prussian state. Here is the palace, as you can see, but here is the Zeughaus, the armory, where the army sits. And if we go back one, then see if we can. Yes. To the right, so I can't see from this angle. You can see to the right on you as you look at it is the small cathedral, Schinkel small cathedral, that's put up later. The palace, political power, sits between military power and religious power. And that is a statement of the way the Prussian state is going to be conceived. And the palace stands, you can see here, the enormous Baroque, later 19th century cathedral, right at the heart, this epitome of state, politics, army, religion. But inside the palace is the museum, is culture, the collection, the Wunderkabinett, the cabinet of curiosities, and the growing art collection of the king. So the intellectual side is beside the political side in the palace. After the Napoleonic invasion, when Prussia redefines itself as the Kulturnation, a nation of culture, a nation of intellect, it's decided that the space opposite the palace should become the place for arts and the arts collection. The palace is Roman Baroque, military power. The new museum will be Greek. Greek for learning, Greek for culture, and it will be free to everybody. This is where antiquities and paintings will be shown, and behind it, the whole island is to become a Freistätte für Kunst und Wissenschaft, a sanctuary for art and knowledge. It's an extraordinary dream, and there's no other country in Europe that's anything like this. This is the new Prussia after the humiliation of the Napoleonic invasion. And over the century, on the island behind the Altes Museum, the Schinkel Museum, a whole series of museums take their place very quickly. Here's the new museum, where the prehistory and now the Egyptian collections are. Then there's the Museum for German Art, for paintings essentially comes next. Then the Kaiser Friedrich Museum for European paintings and the decorative arts. And then finally the Pergamon Museum for the wonderful treasures of Western Asia and the Arab world. By the end of the 19th century, this assemblage is incomparable. Is easiest seen on the model, but all those museums on the left, opposite the palace from which they began. The palace gave them their impetus. The whole world that is studied and seen as part of contributing to European culture is here. The rest, that's the worlds of the Americas, of the Far East, and of Africa and Oceania, is in Dahlem. And this is the model that remains as the ideal of the Schloss, the palace, and the site on which the palace is built. You have religion, war, and an engagement with culture, which is without compare. But the building, particularly the palace, takes on other meanings, not just because of its neighbors, but because of what happens in it. after the Museum Insel has been begun. In 1848, it's here that the King, Frederick William IV, fires on the crowd, and the revolution begins the course that it takes. After 1870, the monument to the right, you can see, is built as a monument of German unity to celebrate the victories of 1870 and 71 and the proclamation of the German Empire. And in the meantime, the dome has been put on by Frederick William IV in the 1850s. Those change the meaning of the place from being the residence of the King of Prussia to being the residence of the Emperor of Germany and the Emperor of Germany after the Revolution of 1848. And then 1914, the Kaiser announcing from the palace the beginning of the First World War. 1st of August 1914, a new dimension to the building, bringing it absolutely into the center of the First World War. 9th of November 1918, and it's here that the Second Republic, the Soviet Republic of Germany, is proclaimed by Karl Liebknecht. The first one, the Scheidemann, the Social Democrat Republic, has been proclaimed in the Reichstag. Here, in front of this palace, Soviet Germany is born. And the revolution, the Spartacus Revolution, the upsets after 1918 take place here. It's occupied by the Soviets, the Liebknecht supporters, arguing for a radical revolution on the Russian lines. It's seriously damaged in the fighting. And then it's put together. The Weimar Republic prevails, it's mended, and is used as partly a museum, partly as an institution for research. And the Nazis don't pay it much attention at all. Second World War, and this building, still functional, is bombed but still standing. Very much still standing. But what is it now for? And what is Berlin? And what is the palace at the heart of the new Berlin? It's the question that is of critical importance for those politicians for whom Berlin is now their capital, but the capital not now of Germany, but of East Germany, of the German Democratic Republic. It's a new capital, it's a new place, and what is to happen to the buildings in the middle? Because the long approach from the west is now blocked. This is not part of a whole city. Its position at the end of a triumphal alley has gone. What is it to do? What is the building now to represent? Well, it's decided that because it can no longer be the center of what it was, because it is no longer part of a whole German Empire with church and army under its control, that the palace is a symbol of Prussian militarism. And as a symbol of Prussian militarism, it has to be destroyed. So although a great deal of it had survived, and you can see how much of it had survived the Second World War, in 1950 it's blown up. It's blown up as a symbol of Prussia. Prussia had been abolished by the Allies 3 years before, the state of Prussia, and therefore the building that symbolized militarist imperial Prussia had to be destroyed. And then what? What do you put in its place? Big debate. Not much happens for a long time. And then in the early 1970s, the German Democratic Republic government decides that on this site, it will construct the Palast der Republik, what will be the parliament of the new German Democratic Republic. It's a parliament in a communist system. It doesn't, of course, have very much to do. It's allowed to approve what the party has already decided, but it is symbolically an important building. And I think, as you can see, it's a pretty good building. It's a good modernist building. When it opens in 1976, it would, I think, have been well received anywhere in Europe. And at its heart is the chamber where the deputies vote as they are instructed. But it is much more than a parliament. And this is where the memories become complicated. Because the memory of this bit is, of course, one thing. It's about the emblem of the socialist, communist East German state. But beside that is a whole series of entertainments in the building. As you can see, it's a place for drinking, it's a bar, it's a place for bowling, it's the best bowling alley within a large distance, and it's a place for dancing and music, and a place where the young get together. And one of the most striking things I found when I went to work at the Humboldt Forum was how many of my East German colleagues had such fond memories of all these. And had bitterly resented the fact that they'd been taken away and destroyed. The inside was absolutely up to date. You can see why it was called Uncle Eric's Lamp Shop. But it's a very powerful grouping of lamps. And what is interesting, you can see here is the jazz concert in Train. And here you can see there are works of art and paintings have been commissioned especially for it, because this was to be a showpiece of East German design and East German art. All the furniture, all the porcelain was specially commissioned. The KPM, which made the Berlin service that the Duke was talking about earlier, produced new ceramics for this. Classics of 1960s design. All the furniture was new, and some very, very interesting paintings were commissioned. This is Wolfgang Matteuer's Guten Tag, a series called Dürfen Kommunisten träumen? Can communists dream? May communists dream? A very typical picture of the period, and wonderfully ambivalent in what it is saying. It's about urban sprawl in one ways. It's about the proletariat having access to the country. It's also saying all kinds of other things about the relationship between nature and industrialization that have become, of course, very popular and important since. This building is an epitome of what the Democratic Republic wanted to be seen as. And it went on playing a political role, not just for the families visiting and the parties, but is in front of it that the demonstrations take place in 1989 for the end of the communist regime in East Germany. When the wall falls in November 89, the whole role of this building is called in question. For a year, it becomes the parliament of a freely elected chamber in East Germany. And to symbolize that, they make a new box for the votes of the deputies. This is now in the Humboldt Forum. A glass box to show completely transparent proceedings. A glass box, a symbol of the new democratic, really democratic German Democratic Republic, no longer the sogenannte Demokratische Republik. And as you all know, within a year, this parliament votes in this box to dissolve itself and for East Germany to become part of West Germany, of the Bundesrepublik. And that means that we're back with a huge problem of urbanism and links and the future. The Parliament in Bonn, the United Parliament, decides the Reichstag will be the future Parliament. What is the relationship now between East and West Berlin, and what is going to happen to the Palast der Republik? The concern and worry about what is going to happen to the whole state is mirrored by the debate about the building. And as it falls into ever more dilapidated condition, and people worry more and more about their jobs, about the economy, about the future, an artist group put on the top these wonderful high letters, Zweifel, doubt. The meaning of the building, unimaginably, has now become entirely about uncertainty about the future. And it is decided in 2002 that the whole thing will be demolished. None of it will be saved. All the memories will go. Nothing will be kept. And a new building will be put in its place. The desolation is extreme. It was said that because of asbestos, nothing else could be done. But the whole building is reduced to the last two towers. All the steel is taken from it and sold to Dubai, where it went in to make the Burj Khalifa, now the tallest building in the world. And for everybody in East Germany, 40 years of their life had been written off, written out of history. And what happens now? What happens to this site? What does this place now mean, given what it has meant within one lifetime? The urbanistic question is one of the key ones. You now have full access from the Brandenburger Tor. When you come down unter den Linden, what is to be there? If it's not to be the Palast der Republik. There are great debates. It should be a great modern building. It should be something really terrific, statement of the new world. And then the campaign begins to say, no, in urbanistic terms, only one thing is possible. And that can only be a reconstruction of the old palace. No architect would produce anything worth having, and we want the old palace. And one man, Wilhelm von Bodin, devises an extraordinary scheme. He arranges, what you're looking at is a gigantic 30-meter high painted canvas stage set of the facade of the palace. He realized that you were never going to persuade people to have the palace rebuilt if they couldn't imagine it. And they can't imagine it, so they must see it. And for a year, between 1993 and 1994, as you came down unter den Linden, you saw on canvas the ancient, the old Schloss. It was an amazing citizen intervention. And it persuaded the Parliament, and the Parliament decided that instead of a modern building, they would put up a total reconstruction, remaking in every detail Schlüter's facades. This was a parliamentary decision, simply astonishing, that every detail of the 1710 building would be replicated with a modern interior. And that messy east wing that we looked at, it was to be totally modern. So this is Franco Stella, the architect's plan. This is the east facade of the building now. What is astonishing, I think, when you compare it with the Reichstag, is that nothing of the Palast der Republik was to remain. There are great debates about what was going on here. Those in favor of the Schloss being rebuilt argued that this was urbanistic, aesthetic requirement to make sense of the plan of the city. Those against it said this is revanchism, triumphalism. You're denying, this is your victory over socialism and the destruction of our lives. Just as the Schloss was blown up as a symbol of Prussian militarism, you want to destroy the Palast der Republik. And more than that, it was unusually, it had been very well photographed before being blown up. Some sculptures had been removed, but unlike many other buildings, particularly something like Chipperfield's Neues Museum, it was decided that virtually no old elements would be incorporated into the building. Here is one of the very few, where you can see on the left the angel rescued from the old building with the new sculpture. Very rare in Berlin to deny that this had been destroyed. And instead of that, all the architectural decoration was to be new carved. This meant literally thousands of eagles. Most of them carved in Czechoslovakia and Germany and Poland and Hungary, where traditional stone carving flourished. And it demonstrates why people felt this was really a revival of Prussia. This was not a building for the new Germany. This was a revival of a discredited Prussia by a right-wing group And as most of the decoration had to be paid for by private means, and many of them turned out to be supporters of right-wing views of various degrees, it was felt that this was an elimination of one part of Germany and the triumph and the reinstatement of the earlier part. And given all the debates about Germany's war guilt for the First World War, Prussian militarism, the abolition of the state of Prussia, it became a very, very bitter argument. But if that was backward-looking, the new building was given a function which was to be totally forward-looking, not a political one at all. It was going to complete the world collections of what was on the Museumsinsel, so that where all the civilizations that had directly affected Europe were already there, those from the rest of the world, previously in Dahlem, were to come and reoccupy and occupy the royal palace. This was to be a great statement that the cultures most despised by the Nazis, particularly Africa, Oceania, the tribal societies, but also the world in Asia and South America, would come to join the rest on the Museumsinsel. And unlike anywhere else in the world, the entire material culture of humanity could be seen in one place. And this would symbolize the new Germany after reunification. And to give the symbol of that, you had to find a name. And of course, the great name was Humboldt. The two Humboldt brothers, Wilhelm and Alexander, you see here in front of the Humboldt University, were the two who, in the first years of the 19th century, transformed the intellectual understanding of the world from Berlin. Wilhelm, who worked closely, was a civil servant, worked closely in the founding of the university in Berlin from 1810 onwards, which became rapidly the leading university in Europe, but also a man who devotes his life to the languages of the world and has the great insight that a language is a way of understanding the world. So this is not the comparative linguistics of somebody thinking about Indo-European or how different languages relate. It's about that every language is its own thought world and must be studied and must be preserved. He's the older brother, and then the younger brother, Alexander. He looks like a younger brother, doesn't he? And he focuses on the natural world. And he travels particularly to South America, and he's the man who really invents ecology. He works on the relationship between plants and temperature and altitude and humidity, and establishes that at the same humidity, the same altitude, the same temperature, anywhere in the world, you're likely to find the same kinds of plants. He takes a global view of vegetation. He invents the concept of the isobar, looking at how pressure moves across places. And he invents, you can almost say, infographics. This is Chimborazo, the mountain in South America that he climbs. And he has an enormous impact on European thought. Darwin, when he sets off for the Galapagos, takes Alexander von Humboldt's diaries with him. Darwin says again and again he couldn't have done anything without Humboldt. Humboldt, rapidly, by the middle of the 19th century, is probably the most famous person in the world. And there are endless places, more places and things named after him than anybody else. There's the Current, of course, which you all know. There's Humboldt Bay in California. There's Humboldt Mountain in Venezuela. There's Humboldt Glacier in Greenland. There's the Humboldt Lily, mostly found in Peru. There's the Humboldt Penguin, found exactly where you'd expect. And the largest container ship in the world when it was built is called the Alexander von Humboldt. And it docked yesterday in Hong Kong, having traveled from Europe. So he is the perfect symbol of everything this new Germany wanted to be. The portrait of the year he died in 1859 in the Met, with Chimborazo in the background, This is the man who resumes everything the new Germany is going to be. The two names together, language, immaterial culture, and vegetation, and natural world, and the collections together, will make in Berlin a statement that can't really be compared. And very obligingly, Alexander also has written against slavery. He particularly attacked the colonial regimes of the Spanish, so the British wouldn't allow him into India because they thought he'd be a threat. It's all very useful these days. And he has, to say the least, ambiguous sexuality, which is extremely helpful. He's the perfect person. The Humboldts together are you couldn't be better. So what is now on track is something astonishing. And we're now around 2010, and the collections that are going to come have some of the greatest things anywhere. The Mexican collections in Berlin are of a different order from those in Paris or London. The Chinese wall paintings from Turfan, from Central Asia, moved at the end of the 19th century, early 20th century, are incomparable. The boats from the South Seas, every West Berlin child remembers being taken to these and being able to climb on them, and a different kind of personal memory. And of course, from the African colonies of Germany, this magnificent throne of the King of Bamoun in Cameroon, given to the Kaiser in 1908. It all looked as though it was going to be fine. And then something totally unexpected, I think, to anybody involved in the planning of the Humboldt Forum, certainly to me, happened, was that Germany began to rethink and to rediscuss its colonial past. Having spent 30, 40 years re-examining, working the memory of the First World War, the guilt for the First World War, the Holocaust, the Second World War, it had lost sight of its colonial period. And when it came back into sight, largely through some very brilliant academics, it was a very unpleasant spectacle. In China, people were reminded, to go back to, in China, people were reminded of the Kaiser's famous Han speech of 1901, when German soldiers were sent to China to put down the Boxer Rebellion, and he told them to behave like the soldiers of Attila, so that no Chinese would ever look askance at a German again, and to take no prisoners and to show no mercy. It was a speech which became absolutely exemplary, paradigmatic for a certain kind of European aggression. And in Africa, the questions began being asked, could this really be a gift between such unequal partners? But much more, that Germany's actions in Tanzania, German Tanganyika, putting down the rebellion, and above all, in Namibia, that those actions were criminal. And Namibia, the driving by the German army of the Herero and the Nama people into the desert so that they would die of thirst, was in 2021 eventually recognized by the German government as a genocide. The first acknowledged genocide of the 20th century. The collections in the Humboldt Forum suddenly stopped looking like a celebration of global humanity and objects tainted with an unresolved colonial history, and made worse by the argument by many academics that the genocide in Namibia, practiced by the army, consciously, under instruction, was part of a path that led unavoidably to the Holocaust and to Auschwitz. That's a debatable point, but it's a point that has been made very strongly. So the colonial debate in Germany took on a quite different tone from London or Paris, where restitution, colonial arguments had been going on for a long time. It was new, and it had the intensity of the link to the Holocaust. What that's meant is that the presentation of these collections has become really unlike any other in the world. One thing I need to say about the Humboldt Forum, it was put together once the building had been decided that museums from Dahlem, the Asiatic Art Museum, and the Ethnological Museum should both move, along with a place for the Humboldt University for research and Land Berlin to show parts of Berlin history. But within the Berlin museums, one of the great traditions of academic freedom is that every curator, the head of every collection, has complete autonomy over how their collections be presented. Deutungshoheit, it's called, authority over meaning of the collection. This, as you can imagine, makes it quite difficult to direct. It's rather as though you're conducting an orchestra where the strings and the woodwinds have decided mostly that they're playing Beethoven, but that actually the cellos think they'll play Wagner because they prefer it. It's resulted in a set of presentations which some may see as beguilingly polyphonic, others as totally confusing. But the African curators felt very strongly that this new reading of the colonial history had to change and had to be acknowledged. So when you enter the African section, the first thing you see is this. A very remarkable statement, challenging you as somebody coming in that you have a white view of this and therefore you're going to be looking at it all the wrong way around. And as you go on, so just in case you can't read that, it says, I have a white frame of reference and a white worldview. It's a very remarkable thing. The last time I visited here, there was with Indian friends. They were rather startled to be told that they had a white frame of reference and a white worldview. And it shows us what has happened, that this debate has become a German debate, not about Africa, but about German behavior and how other Germans view it. So when you come to the collections, they're not intending to tell you about African societies and the material culture. They're organized like this, with the names of the usually military commanders who led the expeditions that looted the objects. They tell you nothing about Africa, everything about European behavior. And again, I know no other place where this has been done. It's, to my mind, Europeanized the whole collection. And it goes beyond, because what we're now looking at is curators who feel that these objects shouldn't be here. They feel they were wrongly acquired, and that to show them is somehow to be complicit in the colonial crimes that led to the horrors of the Third Reich. And so a museum label like what I have never seen before, a label explaining why there are going to be no objects on show. Because they don't have the consent of the people in Tanzania. Who can give consent to the display of such an object is not clear. But in the meantime, they will not be shown. So the exhibition opened with nothing in the cases at all. This is, I think we can say, startling. After 3 years, arrangements were made with some people in Tanzania to show some things. And the exhibition is now about the confusion of Africa in the face of European settlers arriving. And so we have, so here is as you see, a complicated display mechanism. But you're told that you're entering a Tanzanian culture. And you're told that if you like, you might take off your shoes as a sign of respect, that there's nothing to oblige you to do it, but you might choose to. And then, again, the objects that are not to be shown, so they're not going to show the neck ring of an enslaved person, although they talk about slavery, because that would be humiliating to the people who were enslaved. And the long labels explain how brutal German colonial and European colonial occupation was. What is going on is something completely extraordinary. It is the turning round of the museum into a debate with the curators themselves about their view of what happened in Africa, and showing Africa only as Africa fought Europeans. No other aspect of African existence is shown. And in the children's section, here we are presented with a problem of Cameroon, that the Germans are trying to expel people, and what would you and your friend do to help the people of Cameroon resist the Germans? It's a very extreme position, and it has it's dominated entirely the debate about the building, about the place, and about the collections. And it's one of the ways in which the meaning of the place has turned around, because this is no longer the reconstructed Stadtschloss. This is, in the words of a propagandist, the Berlin palace of a genocidal monarch. And that's what was reconstructed. And in those terms, the building has a provocative value to many. And it's not just, of course, the colonial period. The House of Hohenzollern has also come into new focus, and very controversial focus, for its relationship with the Nazis. The realization, becoming public in 2019, that the head of the House of Hohenzollern was seeking reparations, compensation for property confiscated, expropriated without compensation in the late 1940s by the Soviet military administration, caused a storm. And whether or not that was a proper claim depended on whether the Crown Prince in 1933 had or had not afforded material assistance to the Nazis. That's the key phrase. If he had, then everything that was expropriated remains expropriated with no compensation. A violent and bitter public debate about the history of the House of Hohenzollern with a new dimension which added to the view of the House, again, a new meaning, which is still under discussion. And then, just when you thought really we were at the end of what could possibly happen, the reconstruction of the dome. Over the chapel in the palace, the dome put up by Frederick William IV, he who had ordered the shooting of the crowd in 1848, and on the top, the cross. Parliament hadn't explicitly said this was to be added to the facades, but the Stiftung Humboldt Forum had decided that it was an essential part of the facades, and so not only was the dome put back, but the cross on top. A building which is to be about the cultures of the world, with Islamic material, Buddhist material, Hindu material, with a cross on top. Wild debate about what is actually thinkable, what is possible, and would a cross actually be an anti-Semitic gesture in a country and city where anti-Semitism was obviously such a key question. And it was made worse when it was discovered, and here I must say I did not realize this was going to happen, when it was discovered that around the base of the dome, and so we've lost the bottom, which is rather important. Can you lift it up a little bit? Sorry. There is an inscription. If you just tilt the projector, yep, the blue, the inscription devised by Frederick William IV himself, saying that only in Jesus is the salvation of the world to be found, and to the name of Jesus every knee must bow. Can you have this inscription on a building for this purpose or not? Is this what historic reconstruction implies? You can't edit, you can't choose. Or is this a symbol that the Humboldt Forum cannot become a place of tolerance? As a gesture of trying to put this right, outside the Humboldt Forum you now find a reconstruction, a model of the Sanchi Gate, the great Buddhist gate from Sanchi in North India, a statement more visible than the cross or the inscription, that this is about the religions of the world. And then, lastly, but growingly, this debate fed into debates again about what kind of Germany. Is Germany a Christian country, or is it a country that is becoming Islamic? The debates of great vehemence, as you know, and virulence, and a debate about what kind of country we wanted to live in. And politicians took both sides. The cross and the inscription are still the facts of great debate. And then, growingly, once again the question, what does all this say about East Germany? What does this say about the lives of people who from 45 to 90 were not lucky enough to have been liberated by the Americans and the British and the French, but were in the Soviet zone? What does it say about the old Palast der Republik? This big exhibition last year, the past is still present. The past is present and showing aspects of the Palast der Republik as, again, part of an argument about how we now view the Soviet period. Was that a brutal occupation? Were there positive sides? Can one have both? Do we have to have a black or white view? And if so, what is the fate then of memories like this? How do these fit into all Germany's memories? And how does that get articulated in the building? Well, finally, it was decided that, of course, one of the ways you could do this was to remember that in front of the building stands the Monument to German Unity, put up in 1871, after 1871, and a great, great celebration of the new country. Destroyed, of course, and removed when the palace was blown up, although the base was still there. And Parliament eventually decided that it should be the site of a new monument to reunification. And this would be Die Wippe, somewhere between a seesaw and a cradle. An enormous bowl, as you can see. And this was particularly appropriate, it was thought, as a monument to German reunification, because that had been achieved by the peaceful means of the people. The crowds would get onto this, and as they moved to one end, it would tip one way. As they moved the other way, it would tip to the other. And we would have a living demonstration of the fact that Germany is governed by the will and the movements of its people. This has turned out to be almost impossible to build. It is now almost as over deadline as Berlin Airport, and the technical problems are enormous, quite apart from what it might be like to be on this heaving seesaw demonstrating the values of German unity. So you'll not be surprised after all this that there's now a movement actually to tear the Humboldt Forum down and start all over again. Philipp Oswald Schloss Aneignung is the movement, and it shows, I think, the extraordinary power of these two ideas. This really is what makes Germany different from us. But it's also, I think, something that I envy. It was immensely frustrating. You can see how confused the result is. But what is absolutely astonishing about this is the openness and the honesty and the energy with which German public opinion engages with the real questions of identity and the real questions of its past. A debate we still find completely impossible. Who in this country is really going to have a proper debate, and I could say particularly in this House, about the British in Ireland? A really open debate about what was good, what was wrong, what was criminal. Nobody wants to have it. Who is really prepared to talk about Churchill's failures, wrong decisions as well as his great ones? Nobody. We are simply unable to have the kind of conversation, the kind of debate about our past and our identity that is common currency in Germany and which is lived out every day in the Humboldt Forum. This is why I realize I did come from a land with no history, and I very, very much admire the country that does. Thank you very much.